So good morning, everyone. My name's Steve Blow. I'm one of the technology evangelists at Zito. And today we're going to talk about on-premises to the cloud in 3 steps. A lot of you know Zito for different use cases potentially. One of the big ones we're looking at now is mobility as well. So I just want to talk about some of the capabilities Zito has there and how that potentially can help you, particularly with your cloud strategies that we're seeing many organizations adopt. And actually that brings me on to, I guess, what I wanted to start. I want to have a look at really what we're seeing in the marketplace from this perspective. So if we have a look at a couple of figures from Gartner, you can see here by 2021, over 75% of mid-size and large organizations will have adopted a multi-cloud and or hybrid IT strategy. And that's very important. The 2 last pieces in there, it's not a single cloud, and that's everything. It's a multi-cloud or it's a hybrid strategy. And again, I guess what I want to get across there throughout this presentation is where Zito's different there and where we can help you with those scenarios. Gartner also say by 2022, public cloud services will be essential for 90% of businesses' innovation. And again, another key point, again, a lot of that's driven by the fact that businesses and their IT teams, their organization IT teams, don't need to be maintaining hardware and data centers themselves. Instead, they're focusing on that innovation. That's one of the key benefits of having a cloud provider who ultimately manages that piece for you. So a lot of you will probably have known Zito if you've had any engagement with Zito before this point as a disaster recovery tool. It's how we entered the marketplace back in 2011 with our first product release. Obviously hypervisor-based backed replication behind that. But there's been a lot of change, in the industry, but also in our products since then, where we have extended the capabilities. And last year, we actually have renamed our platform to be called the IT Resilience Platform. And that's incorporating multiple use cases. And that, I guess, is obviously one of the things that we're here to talk to you about, one of those use cases, albeit there's many more than that. Today we want to talk about that cloud side of where we engage, so the multi-cloud, hybrid cloud solutions, and our vision really around what we're looking to deliver, including the cloud platforms, but beyond them as well, is a single platform for continuous availability, data protection, and workload mobility to, from, and between multiple clouds, including obviously your on-premises environments as well. And it's that flexibility that we're really looking to deliver there. As I said, from the back of that, we are ultimately able to provide multiple use cases. I mentioned disaster recovery. It's very much what Zito's known for. Beyond that, we obviously have the multi-cloud, hybrid cloud migration mobility capabilities. We're also adding backup capabilities, so elements that are coming in Zito 7 are really going to enhance those backup pieces. And if you saw the Zito 7 sneak peek earlier this month, you would have seen some of that. And then obviously we have the orchestration that fits around all of these, along with the analytics. And the key element here is we're converging all of these use cases into a single platform. And I'll talk a bit about the architecture, but the key thing here is that it's a single platform. It's not multiple modules or anything like that. It's a single platform and a single license. Simplicity really is the key here. So we have a look at our platform and what it's based around. The core to everything we do is around the continuous data protection aspect. Obviously within here, we have our replication capabilities, which we're well known for. We have our journaling capabilities. And again, I'll touch on these in a bit, in a bit more detail as we go through. Application consistency grouping, which is actually pretty unique, particularly in certain use cases. So again, we'll touch on some of that as we go through. And then the long-term retention capability, which is something we're enhancing, as I said, with our next release in a couple of months. Wrapped around that, that's obviously how we're moving the data. But in order to actually get the use cases out of that, you then need the orchestration and automation built in to deliver those use cases. And this is where obviously the mobility piece, non-disruptive, multiple clouds being supported, this is where those pieces all come in and actually provide you an outcome that you're looking for beyond just moving data. It's that whole process of actually moving the data, but actually moving it in a way so you're up and running at the end of the move, rather than you then having a load of manual processes to have to go through. And then lastly, around that, we're wrapping our analytics platform. It gives you that additional control, that visibility. And this can be something that can be utilized beyond, just having a look and seeing, how much bandwidth you're utilizing, what's the storage utilization, things like that. There's actually a lot that you can do in there from an analysis perspective for futures as well as pasts. Key thing is here, as I said, this is one platform. You're not having a multi-point solution where you have something that delivers the protection capabilities, the replication capabilities, and then something else delivering orchestration and automation. This is one platform that delivers the complete end-to-end service for you from that perspective. So we have a look at our architecture. Again, those of you familiar with Zito are probably familiar with the ZVMs, the Zito Virtual Manager. So web UI, it's where the management's all performed from, and the virtual replication appliances, which are deployed per hypervisor host. And these ultimately own the replication and is how Zito scales in an on-premises hypervisor environment. What we do differently, obviously, in a cloud environment where we potentially don't have hypervisor access, is change our architecture slightly. So we use what we call a Zito Cloud Appliance in Microsoft Azure and AWS. These are available in the various marketplaces. Essentially, when you deploy that, they then create relevant storage. In Azure, for example, we use a storage account with blob storage to store the replicated data. In AWS, we use an S3 bucket to store that data. So this is cheap storage. When you're therefore replicating into these environments, some of you, I guess, who have already seen Zito will know that on the target side, the VMs do not exist until you perform a failover. The data's there, but actually we keep the target side nice and clean. So when you look at a target environment like Azure or AWS, you obviously pay for what you use only, and that makes it a very cost-effective way of ensuring that during a migration, during disaster recovery scenarios where you're protecting your workloads, whatever it is, you're only paying for the storage, and the compute is only spun up during the actual move process or recovery process. So it can be very cost-effective from that standpoint. We also support IBM Cloud. And again, in that scenario, we typically work at the hypervisor layer still. But again, that's a lot of automation built in there within their portals as well, so you can have it automatically deployed and licensed, etc. And then I guess one of the biggest things that we should mention around here is our cloud service provider network. We have about 450 cloud service providers globally now who are able to provide you services such as DR as a service. A lot of them utilize Zito to onboard customers into their own cloud platforms as well, utilizing the methodologies and ultimately capabilities that we're going to go through today. So I guess if we look at what an application looks like today, when we talk about protecting your workloads, traditionally, largely that's been done on a per server basis, a per VM basis. And that's because back in the day, applications more so than existed on one VM or maybe just a couple of VMs. If we look at applications today, they're completely different. They're made up of multiple VMs or servers, all combined to deliver that one outcome. And if one of these dependencies isn't here, ultimately the application doesn't work. The way Zito delivers protection differently is quite unique. Instead of obviously protecting your VMs individually, and then when you come to move, you're moving each VM individually, it's difficult to manage. They might be slightly out of sync with each other, and therefore you've got to get them all back into sync post-move. That can be very challenging and ultimately add a lot of time to your migration windows. What Zito allows you to do is actually group your workloads in a virtual protection group, or VPG. This allows you to essentially group your different applications into a single virtual protection group so that when we're protecting them, we protect them all to the exact same point in time. And this is the same in a disaster recovery scenario as it is to a backup scenario, as it is to a mobility scenario. So regardless of what you're utilizing Zito for, you're still creating virtual protection groups. And what this allows you to do essentially is move or recover that entire application to the exact same point in time. The key aspect to delivering that is our journaling capability, where we're ensuring that you are having points in time inserted every 5 seconds or so in the journal. Now, in a mobility use case, you're not going to use a large amount of journaling in there because you want to obviously have zero data loss when you move. In a disaster recovery use case, that can be larger. But the key thing here is whenever we're inserting one of those checkpoints, we're doing it at consistent point in time across all VMs within that DPG. Excuse me. Now, what this journal does enable in a migration scenario is the ability to test a migration. So Zito is continuously replicating the data that's changing from the source site to the target site. And what that enables us to do, therefore, is actually spin up a replica from whatever point in time in the journal you choose onto the target side. We effectively will perform the exact same migration scenario as you will in the live migration, but the key difference is you're doing it to an isolated environment, and I'll touch a bit more on that as we go through. And that isolated, because it's in an isolated environment, that means that your production environment is not impacted. So your production workloads can stay up and running. You can actually perform the migration with no impact on production, validate all of your processes, validate everything that you're doing, validate timescales. Once you're happy with all of that and you've proved that it works, maybe something didn't work in the first test it again, validate that you've rectified the issue. And you can do this in the middle of the day, as I said, because there's no production impact. At the end of that, you're then in a position where you can do the live move. And that's a really powerful tool. As I said, orchestration and automation is one of the key aspects of the Zito product. And what we've done here is, and what I'm showing you here essentially is the different configuration options we give you depending on which platform you're choosing. So I've taken Azure and AWS as an example here. You can choose which VNets you're recovering into, so which networks, same on AWS. You can choose which subnets within that VNet. You can choose security groups. You can choose what recovery disk type you're recovering to in Azure. And you can choose which instance you're recovering to as well on both of them. And this is really key. So you can see here that you can set a default within advanced VM settings. We actually give you the ability to change all of these on a per VM basis as well. So you've got that complete customization. Obviously, if you're moving workloads, likelihood is you're not going to have a single flat network. So you're going to want to maybe maintain some of that network topology when you fail over into Azure or AWS. This gives you the ability to do that so that when we actually move your workloads, we're moving them straight into the relevant networks. All of that is already configured, and therefore you're not spending time manually performing all of these changes. And that includes setting things like static IPs once you're over in those environments. So this can be really powerful from that standpoint. If we have a look behind the scenes, what essentially happens here, and this really is where we differentiate ourselves from what you would consider a traditional migration. So usually in any traditional migration, there's a large data move, and this data move is what takes a large amount of time. And largely when you do that data move, you need to do the vast majority of it at the time that you're actually performing the migration. So you don't get the ability to test, etc., and also you're limited in when you can perform that migration, but also control of it. You're going to have many different VMs and applications that are different sizes. Maybe they're dependent on each other, but because they're different sizes, they're all going to end up on the target side at different times. You might have a spanned network across the two environments, at which point you're running with different elements of the application on different sites, and there's an inherent risk to doing that. What Zito allows you to do is create a virtual protection group, at which point we then perform an initial sync, where we sync the entire data set over to the target site. Once that's synced, rather than your workloads then being up and running in that environment, we actually then just perform continuous data protection. So every single change that's occurring on your target side, on your source side, sorry, is being replicated to your target side. And that essentially places the control around the migration and the timing around that back into your hands. You know, at that point, it doesn't matter when your initial sync finishes. It can be, you know, months before you need to actually perform the migration. You're then in a position where you can perform the migration once you're happy, you've tested, you know, the move and everything, that you've validated all of the processes are in place and correct. And then all we do when you initiate a move is we shut down the VMs on the source side. We insert a checkpoint in the journal post shutdown on the target side. Reason we do that post shutdown is obviously then there's zero data loss, and then we recover to that checkpoint on the target side. So literally the time it takes to perform a migration with Zito from A to B it's just a few minutes of downtime, and that's it. The time basically it takes to shut down a VM and then power on a VM. And this is really powerful, and obviously, as I said, can help a lot with cloud adoption, but also ensuring that you're getting the most out of your strategies. And I'll talk a bit about that as we go through. I guess the key thing to note around this is that Zito's hardware agnostic. We are a software only platform. We're not reliant on any particular vendor or anything like that from a hardware perspective. So it doesn't matter what hardware you're going from or to, or which cloud platform you're going into. As long as it's one of the supported ones that Zito support, and I'll touch on what they are as we go through, Zito can move the workloads to and between them. So if we show you a demo now, I'm going to show you a migration of a couple of workloads into Azure. So you can see here in VMware, I have a Windows VM here, and I also have a CentOS VM. And if we have a look in Azure, you can see right now, I've got my Zito Cloud appliance. These two other VMs do not currently appear in the list here for VM instances. So all I need to do, and actually before I go through that, I'm going to show you some of the configuration in here. So you can see I've got VMs replicating to VMware, I've got VMs replicating to Azure, and I've got VMs replicating into AWS. But if I show you the configuration on this particular VPG, which we'll fail over in a minute, you'll see some of the options that we can configure. So you can configure priority. So this is around replication. In effect, it's quality of service, but it's only utilized during times of contention. So for the most part, Zito will look to keep the data in the target environment as close to the data on the source site. And typically we do that within a few seconds. But you can set that to whatever you want, high, medium, or low. You can obviously choose which VMs you want to replicate. And with Zito, it's worth noting that you can be replicating the same VMs to more than one location. If we then have a look on the next tab, you would then choose which site you want to replicate to. Depending on which site you choose, depends on which options are available to you from then on in. So for example, if you choose AWS, you're choosing VPC networks and things like that. If you're choosing Azure, you're going to see the options that we see in a minute. If you choose VMware or one of our cloud service providers, in those scenarios, you're going to see a few more options that are a bit more specific to VMware at that point. So you can choose journal history. As I said, in a move scenario, this isn't really that relevant other than for test failovers. So I'd recommend you always keep this to as low as possible. So 1 hour is the minimum. The maximum, if anyone is interested, is 30 days here. But then beyond that, we have our long-term retention capability that's able to take points in time to secondary storage for infinite periods of time. You've got a target RPO alert here. This is just an alerting mechanism. It has no impact on how close we get the data on the target side from the source side. As I said, typically that's only a few seconds, and I'll show you what we're achieving right now with this particular virtual protection group in a minute. And you can do a test reminder. Again, this is really only relevant for a disaster recovery scenario if you need to perform testing from that perspective. You can then see the disks that are being replicated. So I've only got one disk attached to my Windows VM and one disk attached to my CentOS VM. If you had more, they would all be listed here. and you can choose to mark a disk as temp data. If you mark a disk as temp data, essentially we replicate it as part of the initial sync, but then from then on, no changes are replicated on it. So that means we're not using bandwidth keeping up with whatever's occurring on that disk. And that's really useful for things like maybe a backup store or something like that. Something where you're getting a lot of transactions, but ultimately you don't care too much about them. That would be where you would utilize the temp data option. As I said, and I showed you some screenshots around this earlier. So one thing I haven't mentioned, those of you who were on the Zito 7 sneak peek earlier this month would have already seen this. This is actually our new UI. So you're probably thinking it looks a little bit different to some of the screenshots I showed you. So this is the Zito 7 UI. So what we've obviously updating that as part of the release and to obviously give it a more up-to-date look and feel. But largely the options that you're configuring are all the same. So again, you can see you can choose which networks, which disk you're recovering into, which instance size. Key thing to note here is you've got the live failover or move options. So these will be what we utilize in a live move. You've got the failover test options. These are the options that will be used if you perform a test. So you want to test your mobility, you would use the test option down here, and it would utilize these network configurations. So as I said, typically with that, you're going to want to make sure that you're using networks that are isolated from your production workloads so that there's no conflict during that period. If you do advanced VM settings, you can choose one of the VMs and you can come in and edit it. And as I said, you can start then doing things like configuring the IPs that you want it to be recovered into. You also have the ability to do pre and post recovery scripts. So if there's anything that you want to do beyond what Zito is already able to do out of the box, you can script this and have this included, maybe something more specific to your own environment, and actually have that so that it's run automatically either before or after the mobility, the move process. Long-term retention, I'm not going to touch on this, but this is where you would configure that. And then obviously it gives you a summary of what we've got configured there. So if we actually perform the move now, all I need to do is go to actions and choose move VPG. You can see because I was already in the cloud migration VPG, I've already got that one selected. I can choose next, at which point we get a few options in here. So you've got the commit policy, and I'll talk a bit about this once we've performed the move itself. But I'm going to set this to none. At which point reverse protection isn't available. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. You can choose force shutdown. This is only really relevant if you don't have VMware tools involved or there's an issue with the VM or something like that. We'll force shut down the VM. Ordinarily, we do a clean shutdown for obvious reasons. So leaving that unchecked is obviously key. Obviously, I don't have any boot ordering configured and no scripts configured at this point either. And then that's it, start move. Those are the 3 steps you go through, at which point we're then going to be in a move scenario where the VMs are going to be shut down on VMware and moved into Azure. So you can see here, it's said that I've selected none as the commit policy. Essentially, it's saying that means that I will need to confirm what I do after the move is completed. Again, I'll show you that once the move's actually completed. So you'll see now here, we've got the move actually in progress. And what you'll see here within VMware is we'll see that these tasks are running. You can see now we've already initiated the guest OS shutdown. So the 2 VMs that were protected are now being shut down. So once those are shut down, we then insert a checkpoint. And after which we then recover into that checkpoint within Azure. So you can see now we're inserting the checkpoint. Again, these are all shown within the VMware tasks. And you can see the VMs are now shut down there. And what we'll see now is in a minute, we'll start having the VMs populated into Azure. As I said, one of the key things here, you don't have these compute instances spun up. So literally all you're paying for it in Azure, for example, is the cheap blob storage. We use page blobs for the replica disks, and then anything within the journal. So all of that hours worth of change in this instance, we'll be using the page blobs. So here we go. You can see we've got our 2 VMs now appearing in here. You can see they're being created. Once they're created, obviously at that point, we'll then be powering them on. So while that's going, I'll show you some of the configuration options that you can get in AWS if you like. So if we have a look at this VPG and edit this one, you'll see that once we get to the replication configuration, we start seeing some different options. So at this point, you can then see that obviously you have VPC network to choose instead of the VNets that you choose in Azure. You obviously have security groups, instance families, and we obviously list every single instance that's available in the region where your Zito cloud appliance is installed. And you can see, obviously, depending on which instance family you've chosen, what the instance types are, as well as the resource assigned to those. So that, again, is quite key. Essentially, what we're doing at this point is we're merging the replica disk with all of the journal changes to ensure that obviously we're having 0 data loss at that point. So that process takes a few minutes, and once that's done, the VMs will then be in a running state and will be booting. One of the things that we've changed in Zito 7 is actually we're giving or utilizing some native cloud capabilities from a scale perspective. So those are something that's going to, again, improve the performance around this even further than maybe those of you who have already utilized Zito in a cloud environment have been familiar with. There we go. So you can see this VM is now running. If we have a look at the CentOS one, this one also is now running. So both of these VMs are now booting within Azure. So if we just give it a few minutes and I'll RDP into the Windows VM, if we get the internal IP of that, and just show you that it's recovered over to Azure successfully. And I'll talk about some of the, so there we go, looks like it's up already. So there we go, we've got our VM moved from VMware on premises into Azure in just a couple of minutes. Hopefully you can see that how this can help with migration windows, where you've previously had entire weekends to copy data sets. Instead, you can slim those down significantly by utilizing Zito. And key thing is as well, as I said, nothing installed in any of the VMs, no impact on production whilst we're replicating. That's, again, one of the unique features of Zito. I guess one of the key things that's worth considering is actually the fact that we are able to be installed in just a couple of hours and replicating in that time. So simplicity is really at the core of everything we're trying to achieve. So you can see that VM's up. If we go back to the ZVM interface now and go back to VPGs, what you'll see is we actually have a couple of options here. So you can see move ended, but because I selected none for the commit policy, what I actually have the ability to do is actually choose to commit or roll back. So what that means is VMs still exist on this target site, on the source side. They haven't been deleted, as you can see. But the VMs are up and running over in Azure. What we haven't done is deleted any of the data that they were built from. So the journal still exists over here. So what that means is if I choose to roll back, actually we will remove the VMs from Azure, and the VMs in VMware will be powered back on, and effectively we reverse that whole process. That takes, again, just a few minutes to do that. Alternatively, if I choose to commit, what you'll see is I'll get an option to reverse protect. So reverse protect is essentially allowing you to, once you've migrated, replicate back from where you came from. If you choose reverse protect, what we'll do is we'll remove the VMs from the inventory of vCenter, but we'll use the disks that are already there to precede the replication back the other way. So we only replicate the changes that have occurred since you performed the move into Azure. Alternatively, if you don't want to reverse protect, you can choose to keep source VMs or not. So this is useful if you want to keep the source VMs post-move, but you don't want to replicate back the other way, for example. I'm going to choose to roll back in this scenario just to show you how easy it is to reverse a migration after you've done it. So literally, it's a case of clicking that rollback, choose OK. What we'll then see is the VMs over here start to be shut back down and then deleted. And within VMware as well, you'll see the rollback task actually occur. Once we shut down the VMs over here, we'll power on the VMs again back in VMware. Any change you've made to the VMs in Azure obviously is lost at that point. Essentially, this is giving you the ability, if you perform the move or you perform the recovery and maybe something's gone wrong, maybe you know, a process that you've got built in isn't working as expected. In that scenario, you can actually roll back even after you perform the live move. So you can see these are now being deleted. And that actually is really powerful as well in giving you the ability to effectively have a safety net during that migration, even in the live failovers, live migration scenario. So once those VMs have been deleted, what we'll then see is the VMs being powered back on in VMware. Obviously, the VMs that were in VMware were shut down cleanly. There's no issue or anything from that perspective with regards to these VMs then being brought back up. Nothing's changed from when they shut down, as I said. All of the changes in Azure are lost at that point. So once Azure has deleted these VMs, they'll just be powered back on. What you'll see again is the task actually within the ZVM as well in various places. So you've got full visibility from that side of things. Here we go. So these VMs are now deleted. That one's obviously not updating, but what we'll then see is the VMs within VMware now being powered back on. In the interest of time here, I think I'm going to carry on with some of the other content I've got to cover. But hopefully you've got a lot of information out of what I've shown you here and the capabilities that Zito can provide you. And we'll get back to the presentation and go from there. So the key thing with Zito, as you've seen, this is the old user interface. We've got the Zito 7 one coming out imminently, so the updated one. But the key thing is it's going to look the same regardless of where you deploy it. So Zito supports many platforms. Whichever platform that you install Zito on, it looks exactly the same. Configuration is exactly the same. There might be some slightly different configuration options, but ultimately the steps are identical. And that again comes back to the simplicity. You know, we're really about making sure that this is really easy to manage, really easy to monitor. And I guess traditionally, if we look at what's been available in the industry from a replication standpoint, a mobility standpoint, typically complexity have gone hand in hand with that, and that's really where Zito's differentiating ourselves. So as I said, AWS is supported, and it's not only into AWS, it's out of AWS as well. Again, we're not using any agents in any VMs within AWS. We're using the native capabilities of AWS. And that's again unique to Zito in that we're always operating that way. We're looking to use the native platform capabilities in order to deliver our capabilities over the top. Same in Azure. You can go in and out of Azure. You can actually go between regions in Azure as well if you want. And essentially, everyone's adopting, like I said, and we've seen some of the figures from Gartner at the beginning, a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud strategy today. What we're seeing a lot of people doing is adopting these platforms and placing their workloads based on day one requirements. But then they don't have any capability to move their workloads around as their requirements change, which we all know requirements do change, whether that's compliance, whether that's regulation, or whether it's performance or something like that, or even cost. Those requirements can change, and having the ability to move your workloads around to the relevant platform today rather than yesterday is really key to getting the most out of your platforms and your strategies that you're deploying from that perspective. So Zito, as I said today, supports Azure, AWS, IBM Cloud. We have over 450 cloud service providers globally, and I'll talk a bit more about them a bit later. And obviously from an on-premise perspective, we support VMware and Hyper-V as well. And we can move workloads between any of those. We also have an analytics platform. So I talked a bit about this earlier on when we were talking about the platform, but Zito Analytics is something that actually delivers a lot of visibility into your environment. It's a SaaS delivered solution. It's optional whether you utilize it, but there's no extra costs for it. There's a completely open API against this. And this gives you the ability to have a lot of visibility around things like IOPS on your production workloads that you're protecting, bandwidth utilization, storage utilization. And yes, a lot of those are powerful for Zito. Because we're operating at just seconds from a real-time perspective, and ensuring we're keeping up with the production site and being only a few seconds behind on the target site, what that actually means is quite often Zito is going to be one of the first things that alerts you if you've got network issues or if you've got storage issues or anything from that perspective. So actually we can provide a lot of value beyond Zito and the use cases we have there, as well as detections for things like, well, when did a ransomware attack occur and where do I need to recover from? All of that potentially can be found within the information that we provide you in analytics. So this can be really useful, as well as giving you the ability to generate report post-test. So if you want to test your migration, you can pull a report out afterwards, see exactly what time it was started, when was it finished. Same for the actual move, when was it started, when was it finished. So if you've got to report up to whoever it might be within your own organization, or maybe you've got to report up to your own customer who you're migrating, utilizing this capability means that you can just export that report. It takes 1 minute to do that. At the end of that, you've then got a report that you can present to a customer and say, this is exactly the processes we took and how long it took. And you can do that in the test so they can feel comfortable before you actually do the live migration as well. I talked about the REST API being available for our analytics platform. It's also available for our ZVM, etc. So you have the ability to automate a lot of these processes. You can integrate this into the likes of vRealize or any of your DevOps tools that you might be utilizing, any of your monitoring tools you might be utilizing. Ultimately, it's a REST API that's there to be utilized, so it's worth knowing that that does exist. If we look at the DRaaS side of things, so as I said, we've got a lot of cloud service providers who are utilizing Zerto for DR as a service, backup as a service, and also to help onboard customers and also move customers. So if we have a look at the Magic Quadrant from Gartner last year, there's 10 providers on there. 9 of them are utilizing Zerto to deliver that capability. If we look at the Forrester Wave, there's 10 providers again on here, but all 10 of them are utilizing Zerto to deliver that capability. So that really goes to show where we are with regards to cloud service providers and our partnerships there. We're very much at the leading edge on that side of things. If we talk about potential use cases for migrations, so it could be things as simple as infrastructure refreshes, on-premises migrations, maybe you just want to move to another environment, a new environment or something like that. Any storage, any hypervisor that's supported, so VMware or Hyper-V, it could be between those two, and that's really, really powerful, particularly when you look at mergers and acquisitions. Mergers and acquisitions is a strong use case for Zerto because quite often in mergers and acquisitions, IT environments are inherited, infrastructure is inherited, and they're not going to be aligned from a standards perspective. And one of the first things that most IT organizations or divisions are going to want to do at that point is merge them so that they are on the same standards. Zerto, because of our agnostic approach and our ability to remove locking, gives you the ability to in effect bring those environments all back in line and merge them together so they're all in standard without complex manual intervention or anything like that. Public cloud migration, so I talked about public cloud adoption. Zerto can be utilized for that. We support AWS, Azure, and IBM Cloud, and that can be from VMware or Hyper-V or any of the other platforms. So the ability to move workloads into the cloud is absolutely something that Zerto's used heavily for today. Obviously shown you our cloud service provider capabilities and where we are in the market from that perspective, over 450 of these globally. So again, utilizing Zerto to get the most out of your cloud service provider is something that you can see a lot of value in. And then lastly, say you have adopted a public cloud platform, how do you get out? These cloud platforms often make it easier to get into them than it is to get out of them. Zerto is going to give you that capability to move in and out with freedom. And I guess that's, again, one of our key differentiators. Just wanted to bring a customer case study. It's all very well me saying this, but having a customer say their thoughts on what's going on here is really powerful. So Spirit Airlines in the US, this is a statement from James Nolan, and he stated that Zerto's tight integration with Microsoft Azure enables replication to Azure Premium SSD managed disk quickly and at scale. And I think those two last points that he mentions, quickly and at scale, are the key aspects there. Simplicity is the key to enabling that quickly piece, and doing it at scale is a challenge for every organization, and it's one that Zerto has proven time and time again. So I talked about some of our customers and cloud service providers. So, this gives you, I guess, an idea of where Zerto's footprint is and who some of our major partners are out in the industry. So you can see Azure, IBM, AWS, we've talked about those, VMware, HPE, SunGard. We also have the likes of Iland, who are the leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant from a DR as a service perspective. So there's a lot of providers out there utilizing Zerto and partnering with us today. So just to finish up here, guys, I just wanted to point out that SirToken, our annual conference, is running in Nashville this year in May. We've actually got an offer going on until the end of this month, where you buy one pass to SirToken and you get one free. So it's worth knowing that this offer's there. Go ahead and have a look on our website. It's zerto.com/SirToken, and you can go and register and get yourself to there. There's going to be lots of exciting content, more of what you've seen today, as well as hands-on labs and the likes. So thank you very much. I think we've got some time left, so we'll cover some questions. So if you've got any questions, feel free to put them into the question box and I'll work my way through them now. So if you migrate VMs to AWS, the servers will get assigned new IP addresses. How do you handle end user access to the servers once they have been migrated? So we can assign private IPs when you fail over into AWS. You can then either have a post recovery script that integrates with AWS and essentially performs then the public IP configurations. Alternatively, you can have that pre-assigned beforehand, depending on what you're utilizing from a network perspective. Otherwise, DNS is probably the best way to handle that challenge, Ryan. AHV support on the roadmap. Definitely on the roadmap, something we've been talking about a lot. I don't have any dates for you at this point. So anyone who doesn't know, AHV is Acropolis from Nutanix, and that's on the roadmap, but I don't have any dates, unfortunately, at this point. What are the network bandwidth considerations from on-premise to a cloud target, for example? On-prem has its own ISP service at, say, 100 megabits per second. So Zito says there's a minimum 5 megabits per second, but in reality, it's down to the rate of data change on the source environment. So if you've got a high rate of data change, Zito's obviously replicating all of those changes in near real time. The higher the rate of data change, the higher bandwidth requirements there's going to be. But the key thing with Zito is that's a consistent stream. It's not we're taking a snapshot every hour or something like that and sending an hour's worth of data. So it's a lot more manageable from that perspective. We will be sharing this PowerPoint, anyone who's asking for that. So we'll share the video behind this. Just a couple more questions here, I think. So someone's asked, can you help me exit a cloud platform if I change my mind? So yeah, as I mentioned, Zito supports replication into and out of the platforms that we support. So absolutely, it's something that we get asked a lot, something CFOs in particular seem to be very interested in. So absolutely, that's something can help you with. So I think that's all the questions, guys. So thank you very much. I'll give you a few minutes back of your day and have a good one.